Can you talk about specific studies or research on BonOlive and what some of the results have shown?
BonOlive has in fact been studied in over 20 different studies. Those studies ranged from cell culture studies, which means that they take cells from humans and they really put the compound, the active compound, in combination with the cells, and they looked at the development of these bone-forming cells. So that's really taking it in a very most simple approach. You take the cell, you put the compound on top, and you see what is the result. Of course, this is an isolated investigation. You don't really know what will happen with bone formation. So that's why a number of animal studies were also performed. In these animal studies, you work with a model which is a rat model which develops osteoporosis. So it's a very well-known and well-established model. If you don't treat the animal with a test product, it will spontaneously develop osteoporosis. So we used this well-known model to combine, to give the BonOlive and the active compound to the animals, and we could really see that these animals were completely protected against development of osteoporosis. So this was already a very fine, very nice proof that, in fact, it's not only just in cell cultures that this thing works, but it also works in animals. Now, an animal is, of course, not yet a human being, so the next step was that we had to test this also in humans. Now, as bone development and bone metabolism is a very slow process, you cannot just give your product once and look at the results in humans. You have to keep giving the product for a long time. So what we did was, in fact, we did a 12-month study in which we gave 64 people either a placebo or our BonOlive product for a period of 12 months. So for a full year, people took either placebo or our active compound, and we monitored how bone formation was stimulated in these individuals. Now, very interesting was that we saw a 32% increase in the most important marker of bone formation, which is osteocalcin, a generally accepted marker for bone formation. This marker increased with 32% as opposed to the placebo. At the same time, we could also see that individuals were protected against further bone loss, which we measured, in fact, by actually looking at their bone structure, at their bone mineral density by means of a DEXA scan. So this means we have the data in vitro in animals, but also in a placebo-controlled double-blind clinical study, the golden standard of clinical studies. And the last study that we then actually performed, we knew it works in vitro, we knew it works in animals, and we saw that it works in humans. The last step that we then had to investigate to complete the story is see whether the active compound, this hydroxytyrosol, the metabolite of oleuropein, also can be found back in the body. Because if we can find it back in the body and we see that there's an activity, we can really make the final link between our product and the protection against bone loss. And this we did in a bioavailability study in which we gave the product and actually found that there was a very good bioavailability, a very good circulation in the blood of the active compound. Now, a very interesting finding that we also did in the clinical study and for which we also have mechanistic data is that the product is not only active towards bone health, but also has a very positive effect on blood lipids and blood cholesterol. So this means it also has a cardiovascular endpoint. Now, we had already expected that this would occur because from our mechanistic studies we found out that the bone-forming cells, that those cells, they are formed from what we call stem cells. So stem cells are the very early precursor cells present in our bones, which then differentiate, which transform into bone cells. Now, the same precursor cells, they can, instead of transforming into bone cells, they can also transform into adipocytes, which are lipid storing cells. Yeah? Because what you typically see in osteoporosis is that this balance between the transformation of these precursor cells into bone-forming cells or into these adipocytes, that shifts more and more towards adipocytes. In fact, you get some kind of a fattening of your bone marrow which you get old. And this is, to a large extent, associated also with osteoporosis, because if your precursor goes towards fat storage cells, it doesn't go towards bone-forming cells. Yeah? What we found out was that BonOlive very specifically supports the transformation of those stem cells into the bone-forming cells, which makes that you have less adipocytes, less lipid-storing cells, and you can actually also improve your lipid metabolism by taking BonOlive.
Can you talk about the safety of the product? And a lot of people might think, if my bones are bad off, I better take a little bit more. I mean, is that safe to do if they end up doing that?
Olives and olive leaves in general have a very long history of consumption. Everybody eats olives, has olive oil, etc. So as such, there's already a very good safety. Now, important is also that there are other types of olive extracts which exist, and also in these very specific olive leaf extracts, never any negative side effects were found. This is just the history of safe use, as they call it, which you can see already that there is no tendency of having negative problems. Of course, if we want to develop our product for a very specific endpoint, we also have to be sure that our type of extract is safe. So Bioactor has performed safety investigations, has performed it in animals, has performed it also in humans, and no side effects were noted. So the product is perfectly safe for human consumption, even over longer periods, as was shown in this 12-month clinical study.
You said that this is BonOlive is something people should take for a longer period of time. When would they start noticing a difference? Obviously, they have to be tested. They wouldn't feel anything, right? But when could they notice a difference in their bone strength?
One of the difficulties, of course, with bone health is that it's indeed a very slow process. If you look at a product which lowers your blood pressure, you will notice that immediately. Here, people will not feel immediately that they have very strong bones again. What we saw was that, in fact, when we did this study, and we investigated the people after 3, 6, and 12 months, that already from 3 months on, we could really see that this trend of bone loss was inversed, and that there was an increase, a gradual increase over time of this osteocalcin, of this marker. So as early as 3 months, we could already see an effect, which is nice. Of course, if you want really to have a long-term protection and a long-term prevention of osteoporosis, you should take the product as early as from 30, 40 years, because at that age already the bone loss process starts to become more important, and continue taking the product over a very long period.